Today what I did is I wanted to find out how fast my dinghy will drift if I just park it next to land and let it drift out to sea.
This video is based on publicly available reports, verified news sources, and named on-record sources. All statements reflect what has been reported, not confirmed conclusions. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime in connection with his wife's disappearance. He denies all wrongdoing through his attorney. He is presumed innocent under the law. The Kai's criminal investigation is active. No individual is accused of any crime in this video. The water was measured, not estimated, not calculated from a desk using theoretical models. Measured by a man who got into a dinghy on the Sea of Abaco with a GPS unit running and a camera recording, and let the water do exactly what Brian Hooker says the water did to him on the night of April 4, 2026. He drifted for 1 hour. In 1 hour, under conditions Brian himself described, using Brian's own wind speeds, Brian's own geography, Brian's own starting parameters, Blaine Stevenson covered 0.7 nautical miles. 1 hour. 0.7 nautical miles. Now apply the math to the distance Brian says he traveled. Approximately 4.3 statute miles from the incident location to the Marsh Harbor boatyards, where he eventually beached the dinghy and walked through brush until he found a road. 1 nautical mile equals approximately 1.15 statute miles. Stevenson's 0.7 nautical miles per hour converts to approximately 0.805 statute miles per hour. Divide 4.3 statute miles by 0.805. The result is 5.3 hours. Brian Hooker says it took 9. The gap between those two numbers, 3 hours and 42 minutes, is not an interpretive discrepancy. It is not the natural variation between two people's different perceptions of a difficult night on the water. It is not a rounding error or a memory lapse or the kind of imprecision that anyone who has ever been lost or frightened might produce. 3 hours and 42 minutes is almost the length of a feature film. It is time in which an enormous number of things can happen. Decisions can be made. Situations can be assessed. And it is time that Brian's own described conditions, generously applied using his own wind speeds, his own geography, his own drift scenario, simply do not require. Stevenson gave Brian every benefit he could give. He used Brian's stated parameters. He ran the test on the actual water. He documented the result with GPS and camera. And the result that came back, 5.3 hours, is permanent. It exists in the public record independent of whatever the legal process ultimately produces. The water has been measured. And the measurement does not fit the account. That is where this investigation now stands. Not in the realm of impression or witness memory or conflicting recollections. In the realm of physics. And physics does not negotiate. Before getting into what the drift demonstration means for the full picture of this case, you have to understand who Blaine Stevenson is and why the footage he produced and the recording he released carry the specific weight they do. Stevenson and his wife Marn met Brian and Lynette Hooker in late 2023 in Bradenton, Florida. Their boats were anchored near each other. The sailing community builds connections quickly and holds them in a particular way. Proximity on the water, shared reliance on weather and tides, the kind of trust that develops between people who depend on the same elements. They sailed together. They ate dinner together. They were friends in the truest sense that the sailing world produces. When Lynette disappeared on April 4, 2026, Stevenson went public almost immediately with his concerns. He pushed for more transparency about the search. He spoke to reporters. He challenged Bahamian authorities' communication with local mariners. He went on record saying he kept meeting sailors anchored in the same general area, people who had been physically close to wherever the Hookers were that evening, who had no idea any of this had happened. How, he asked on record, is that possible? That question has never been answered to the satisfaction of anyone following this case. But Stevenson did not stop at public statements. In the days following the disappearance, while Brian was still speaking, still constructing the account he would carry forward, Stevenson and Marn called him. Brian spoke to them as friends. He gave his version of events the way people give versions of events to people they trust. Openly, with details, without the careful editing that comes with knowing an account is being scrutinized. Stevenson recorded the conversation. Brian did not know. That recording, 40 minutes of Brian Hooker's own voice, captured without his awareness, played by Ashley Banfield for a national audience on Drop Dead Serious without cutting a single frame, is the document that placed Brian's account inside the public record in his own words. Not a summary. Not a paraphrase. His voice. His phrasing. The specific way the account is constructed. What is said. And just as importantly, what is not. A man giving an account he had carefully composed for law enforcement and media sounds different from a man talking to friends he trusts. The recording captures both. And the difference between them is audible. But Stevenson understood that argument about what someone said and how a night on the water might be remembered differently by different people has no floor. Those arguments can be sustained indefinitely. What cannot be argued with is a GPS result from the actual water under the actual conditions. So he built the test. He selected a dinghy comparable in size to the one Brian and Lynette were in that night. He selected conditions designed to match what Brian had described, 10 to 15 knot winds, tidal direction and current consistent with Brian's stated parameters. He brought a sandwich and a radio for safety. He got in the dinghy, put up his feet, and let the water do what Brian says the water did to him. No paddling. No steering. Complete passivity. 0.7 nautical miles in 1 hour. GPS tracked. Documented on camera. Permanent. Now, the wind speed problem. Because this is where Brian's account doesn't just fail the drift calculation. It fails it twice. Brian has given different wind speeds to different audiences for the same night. To first responders, relayed by Richard Cook, the fire team lead with Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue, the wind was 18 to 22 knots. That was the number Brian gave the people who first responded to his account. 18 to 22 knots. Enough, he said, that he couldn't paddle to shore against it. To investigators at a different point, the number was 10 to 15 knots. That is the range Stevenson used for his drift test. The conservative range. The one that gave Brian's account the most favorable conditions. Those are not the same number. 18 to 22 knots and 10 to 15 knots describe meaningfully different sea conditions. A person who gave different wind speeds to different audiences for the same night on the same stretch of water was either genuinely unable to keep track of what he experienced, or was calibrating his account to whatever the moment required. Here is the mathematical irony that makes the inconsistency worse rather than better for Brian's account. When you apply 18 to 22 knot conditions to Stevenson's drift formula, the crossing time actually decreases. Stronger wind produces faster drift. Faster drift produces a shorter crossing time. So the version of events where Brian cited higher winds to first responders should have produced a drift time even shorter than 5.3 hours. If Brian genuinely had 18 to 22 knots working in his favor on that night, his 9-hour claim becomes even less defensible. Not more. Every wind speed he has named for that night produces a result that is incompatible with 9 hours. And then there is the witness testimony about actual conditions. Multiple witnesses, per Banfield's confirmed reporting, described the Sea of Abaco on the night of April 4th as calm. Banfield herself, based on accounts gathered through her investigation, described conditions near Elbow Cay as flat and glassy. These are the accounts of people who were on or near that water that evening. People with direct sensory memory of what it looked and felt like. People who understand the difference between a 15-knot sea state and stillness. They were not describing unpredictable seas. They were not describing high winds. They were describing flat water. Flat water produces less wind-driven current. Less current produces slower passive drift. Slower drift produces a longer crossing time, not shorter. So the actual conditions witnesses describe make the gap between Stevenson's 5.3-hour result and Brian's 9-hour claim wider, not narrower. Stevenson's test was conservative in Brian's favor. He used Brian's stated conditions. The actual conditions that night were calmer than those parameters, which means the real drift time on the actual night, under the actual conditions witnesses describe, would have been longer than 5.3 hours. The gap grows in every direction. Against every wind speed Brian named. Against the actual conditions witnesses observed. 3 hours and 42 minutes that Brian's own described conditions do not produce and that his account does not explain. Now Lynette's daughter. Because Carly Aylesworth's voice in this investigation is not supplementary. It is central. Carly got a phone call from Brian the day after her mother disappeared. She has described that call in terms that are difficult to sit with. Brian told her Lynette was missing. That she had been missing since the previous night. Before Carly could fully process that information, he mentioned that they were going to come up soon to see her. He ended the call suddenly. Carly described it plainly. He dropped a bomb and kept talking. Then he was gone. She was left trying to absorb news that hadn't landed yet, with a stepfather who had already pivoted to travel plans before her mother had been in the water for 24 hours. Marn Stevenson, who had been one of Lynette's closest friends on the water, told News Nation that Lynette had sent her private messages in 2024 describing the marriage in words that made her worry for her friend. In one of those messages, Lynette wrote that it had been real bad and that she could not be out there with Brian. That is Lynette's own voice. On her own phone. To a friend she trusted. More than a year before she disappeared. And then there is the detail Banfield's reporting surfaced that gives every physical inconsistency in Brian's account its full weight. In the weeks before she disappeared, Lynette purchased a one-way ticket home. She was making plans to leave. Darlene Hamlet, Lynette's mother, had warned her daughter about Brian. She had used a specific word. Vicious. Whether Lynette had told Brian about the ticket. Whether he knew the marriage was in its final weeks. Whether that knowledge was present on the dinghy on the night of April 4th. Those are the questions the investigation is built inside of. The context that gives every number in the drift calculation its full human weight. Now the soulmate. Because this is where the investigation's most significant evidence lives, and where Brian's professional background becomes specifically relevant. The soulmate is a 46-foot sailing vessel. It was the home Brian and Lynette shared for years. The backdrop of the life they documented together, cooking on deck, sailing in glassy water, photographing each other under wide blue skies. The boat they named after a word that described their relationship. It is now in the custody of the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service, along with its full electronics package. Understand what a 46-foot offshore sailing vessel carries in terms of digital infrastructure. Chart plotters record vessel position continuously and store that data in track logs, a running GPS record of where the boat traveled, in sequence, with timestamps attached to every position. AIS, the automatic identification system, broadcasts position to other ships and shore stations at regular intervals, creating a paper trail that exists whether the vessel operator wants it to or not. Satellite communication devices log contact times. Electronic navigation apps record routes. Every piece of digital equipment on a modern blue water sailing vessel is, in a very real sense, a witness. One that does not have the option of changing its story based on what investigators need it to say. Kais took all of it. Federal agencies seize electronics when the judgment has been made that those devices contain information material to a criminal investigation. That is not a routine administrative step. It is a decision made when investigators believe specific digital records will either confirm or contradict a specific account of specific events. Whatever the Soulmates chart plotters logged on the evening of April 4th, whatever the AIS transmitted, whatever timestamps exist across every connected device on that vessel, is now in federal hands. In a form that cannot be revised after the fact. Brian also produced something himself that belongs inside this picture. He preserved a screenshot from his Navionics navigation app that purportedly shows the route the dinghy took on the night Lynette disappeared. That image has been obtained and examined by CBS News. Think carefully about that decision. In the immediate aftermath of a night during which Brian says his wife went overboard and he was unable to save her, one of the things he chose to document and preserve was GPS data from that specific night. Not at the request of police. He held on to it himself. When it became convenient or necessary to share it, he shared it. And then there is the professional background that Banfield's reporting surfaced. Brian Hooker worked for AT&T. The infrastructure AT&T operates involves GPS systems, wireless communication networks, and the technical architecture that governs how data is created, transmitted, stored, and accessed across connected devices. Whether that background gave Brian a specific understanding of what his devices were logging on the night of April 4th, what the Soulmates chart plotters were recording, what his phone was tracking, what Navionics was preserving, and whether that understanding shaped any decisions he made that night or in the days that followed, is something the seized electronics are directly positioned to help investigators answer. A man who understands how digital data is created and stored does not preserve a GPS screenshot from the night his wife went overboard by accident. He preserves it because he understands what it shows, and what it does not show. Kais has both the Soulmates' own record and Brian's curated screenshot. The comparison between what the vessel systems logged and what Brian chose to share with CBS News is now sitting in the federal investigation record. Now the mystery sailboat. Because this thread reveals something specific about the shape of what Kais is building. On April 4th, before the night that changed everything, the Soulmate had been anchored in Aunt Pat's Bay. According to a Coast Guard memo obtained by CBS News, Kais launched a formal investigation to identify the owner and occupants of a sailboat that had been moored near the Soulmate in that anchorage around the same time. The memo states plainly, those individuals may have information relevant to the ongoing investigation. Kai's publicly broadcast that there are witnesses they have not yet reached. People who were physically near Brian and Lynette Hooker in the hours before the night unraveled. People who may have observed the couple together. Heard a conversation. Noted a mood. Seen something that did not seem important at the time and only became important after a woman went missing. Federal investigators do not issue public requests for help identifying witnesses unless they believe those witnesses exist and that their accounts carry specific investigative value. The mystery sailboat occupants were yards from the soulmate before it got dark. What they heard or observed from the anchorage, whether anything about the atmosphere between Brian and Lynette in the hours before struck them as unusual, is information that the investigation cannot reconstruct from physical evidence alone. It exists in human memory, and Kai's is actively working to find the people who carry it. Then there is the Zamsili. A surveillance camera on a vessel called the Zamsili recorded 3 discrete light events on the night of April 4th. The camera was running because it was always running, that is its function. No one on April 4th had designated that night as one worth documenting in advance. Brian Hooker had no awareness of that camera's existence or its field of view. Whatever it captured was captured without any possibility of adjustment for the lens that was watching. 3 events. 3 timestamps. Each one a fixed point that either aligns with the account Brian has given or contradicts it. The flare witnesses operate in the same investigative space. Banfield's reporting confirmed that witness accounts of light events on the water that night are part of the evidence picture. Flares are not subtle. They are fired specifically to be seen. The people who see them remember them, their brightness, their direction, their approximate timing, with a clarity that other nighttime observations rarely have. If flares were visible in the relevant area on the night of April 4th, those observations carry timestamps in the memories of the people who hold them. Whether those timestamps place the events inside or outside Brian's stated timeline is not ambiguous. It either fits or it does not. The Zamsili footage. The flare witnesses. The mystery sailboat occupants. The soulmate's own electronics. All of it converging toward the same window of time on the same stretch of water. Now the early response failure. Because this detail has sat in the background of this investigation without receiving the analytical weight it deserves. The call to police came around 4:30 in the morning on April 5th. By that point, according to what Brian told investigators, Lynette had been in the water for approximately 8 hours. 8 hours in the Sea of Abaco, on a stretch of water known to the sailing community, surrounded by anchored vessels, in a harbor town where boats and people are never far away. Blaine Stevenson went on record saying he kept meeting sailors anchored in the same general area who had no idea this had happened. People who had been physically close to wherever the hookers were that evening. People who might have seen something or heard something or noticed a movement on the water at an unusual hour. They were never alerted during the critical window when that information could have been gathered with the most clarity and the most precision. That is not a minor administrative failure. It represents a window of potential witness knowledge that was partially closed before it was ever fully opened. The mystery sailboat that Kai's is now formally trying to identify, people who may have been yards from the hookers before the night began, is exactly the kind of witness that aggressive early outreach might have located immediately. Instead, Kai's is still searching for them publicly weeks into the investigation. Stevenson addressed this directly and on record. He described being openly frustrated that local boaters in the area had not been officially notified to assist the search. He was not speculating. He was reporting his own direct experience of meeting sailors who had been there, who had no idea. Then there is the Conch Inn. Witnesses placed Brian at the Conch Inn while other people were on the water searching for his wife. According to Banfield's reporting, he was on the porch for 2 days. Not organizing a search effort. Not coordinating with volunteer rescuers. Not driving the search operation with the urgency of a husband who does not know where his wife is. On the porch. That image has attached itself to the public understanding of this case. And it has never been credibly addressed. Here is where the investigation stands as of today. The drift test produced 5.3 hours against 9 hours claimed. A gap of 3 hours and 42 minutes that Brian's own stated conditions, at every wind speed he has named, cannot produce. The actual conditions witnesses describe make that gap wider. The soulmate's full electronics package is in federal custody. Chart plotters. Navigation apps. Every digital record that vessel generated on the night of April 4th. In a form that cannot be revised. Brian's AT&T background, his professional familiarity with GPS infrastructure, wireless communication networks, and data management, is part of what Kai's is examining alongside those. Electronics. A man who preserves a GPS screenshot from the night his wife goes overboard and who understands how digital data works is a man Kai's will be asking specific questions about. The mystery sailboat occupants are still being sought through a formal public KAI's request. The Zamsulis footage, 3 discrete light events, 3 timestamps, is in the investigation record and has not been publicly released. The flare witnesses carry timestamps in their memory that either fit Brian's account or do not. Lynette purchased a one-way ticket home in the weeks before she disappeared. Her mother warned her. Her friend received private messages describing a marriage that had become unsafe. And her stepfather, on the phone with her daughter the morning after she went missing, mentioned upcoming travel plans before the call ended. The Royal Bahamas Police Force arrested Brian, held him, questioned him specifically about events investigators characterized as causing harm resulting in death, extended his detention, and then released him without charges. That release is not exoneration. It is a statement about what evidence in that specific jurisdiction at that specific moment in the investigation met the threshold for a charge. Releasing a suspect after initial questioning is a routine outcome of an investigative detention. KAI's operates under a completely different framework. The Coast Guard Investigative Service investigates federal crimes committed on or involving U.S.-flagged vessels by U.S. citizens. The Soulmate is a U.S.-registered vessel. Brian and Lynette Hooker are American citizens. KAI's investigation runs independent of what Bahamian authorities do or do not pursue. It applies federal standards. And it will reach its conclusions on a timeline set by the complexity of the evidence, not by the cycle of public attention. Brian being released in the Bahamas did not close the KAI's investigation. They are entirely separate processes with entirely separate outcomes. Stevenson sent Brian a personal message in the days after Lynette disappeared. He described that message to CBS News himself, on the record, with no hedging. He told Brian that Lynette's family had trusted him with their loved one and that he had not lived up to that trust. Those were not the words of an investigator or a journalist. They were the words of a friend. Someone who had been on the water with both of them. Who understood exactly what trust on the water means. And who was saying plainly what the sailing community was feeling. Stevenson put his name on it. He was not operating anonymously. The same directness he brought to the drift test, he brought to that message. Together, the recorded phone call, the personal confrontation, the drift demonstration, they form something that argument cannot undo. The voice is recorded. The water has been measured. Both are in the public domain. Cross-referenced against a body of evidence that a federal investigation is also examining with tools the public does not have access to. Testimony can be disputed, reframed, supplemented, walked back. Physics cannot be. When you say the conditions produce a result and someone goes out and measures the conditions producing that result, the measurement is the answer. No version of Brian's account can absorb a 3-hour and 42-minute gap without explaining what filled it. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She had grown up near water. Her mother described a family that boated, swam, understood the water the way some people understand land. Lynette carried that into her adult life. The ocean became her element, her freedom. The place she described in her own words as her happy place. Her Instagram shows a woman fully alive in motion. Wind in her hair. Sun on her face. Laughing on deck. Diving under the surface to drift alongside sea turtles. A woman who had found the life she wanted and was living it in frame after frame of ordinary, radiant joy. In the weeks before she disappeared, she bought a ticket home. She was ready to leave. And then she was gone. Her daughter is still waiting. Her mother is still waiting. The sailing community that went out looking for her and found no trace is still waiting. The question that Stevenson's number permanently attaches to Brian's account is not rhetorical. It is specific, measurable, documented. What was happening during those 3 hours and 42 minutes the drift does not account for? That question, framed now not as suspicion but as a specific, measurable, physics-based discrepancy between a claimed timeline and a GPS-verified result, is what the Coast Guard Investigative Service is conducting an active criminal investigation to answer. If you have any information about Lynette Hooker's disappearance, contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force or the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service immediately. Drop a comment. Blaine Stevenson gave Brian's account every benefit he could, used Brian's own conditions, Brian's own geography, Brian's own distance. The GPS came back with 5.3 hours. Brian claimed 9. What do you think KAI's is going to find when they finish going through the Soulmate's electronics? And does the existence of a 3-hour and 42-minute unexplained gap change how you understand everything else in this case? Tell us. We read every single one. And stay close, because the moment Kai's produces a public result, the moment those soulmate electronics tell investigators something they can act on, the moment the mystery sailboat occupants are identified and interviewed, this channel will be the first to break it down. We will see you in the next one.